In the second half of tonight's class, we focus on the highest of the four levels of God's related to creation. It's all Him. It's only Him. There's nothing but Him. We stated it, we questioned it, and we tried to understand it. That our human minds can understand how creation didn't change God's reality at all. And then the third level was so much higher, where all of creation, so to speak, doesn't affect, is meaningless, is irrelevant. And then the highest of the four that the Rebbe is saying here, all there is Him. Which, of course, all there is Him is the idea that we discussed for chapter 21 and 22 and 23. So hopefully that's in our brains. That concept that everything is Him. There is nothing but Him. Every detail of everything is Him. And therefore, anytime I would choose to do something in contradiction with His will, it's as if I'm thinking I can separate myself from what I am, from Him, which is why every transgression is idolatry. Remember that line we liked? I don't serve idols. I can't do this because I don't serve idols. I can't do that because I don't serve idols. What do you mean you don't serve idols? You're just gossiping. Or you're just losing it with your kids. What do you mean you don't serve idols? No. Because if I'm going outside of His will, what is outside of His will? What is that? It's all Him. Except I think I'm not Him. I think I'm separate from Him. I think I'm the idol that exists independent. So all there is Him, is that highest level of reality, of understanding that all of creation, again, the pen or the world, the high spiritual world we discussed in Tanya, Atzilus, the world of being, or the greatest angels, Michael, Gabriel, the souls, the legions of molecules and cells and everything that we know about on planet Earth, it's all part of Him. That there's nothing outside of Him. I personally, obviously, I have a great passion for Tanya. I find this one of the most foundational thoughts and most reassuring thoughts that I know. It's all Him. It's only Him. There's nothing but Him. So, of course, I'm bringing it down to try to make these very deep ideas seem very simple. But remember, there's a lot of depth I'm not sharing, because that's not the purpose of Tanya. But just to understand this enough to be able to think into it, to be able to let your mind get submerged. You can envision this idea of a ritual bath, a mikvah, and one goes under and the water is just completely surround. The person is within the water, like within the womb. So this is like your thoughts, God within creation, God that around giving existence to creation, God, a level of God that creation is irrelevant, a level of God that all is Him. And as we delve with our mind into these thoughts, into this womb, something happens inside of us, which is, of course, the point of why we're doing this. Literally, all the spiritual realities, our physical reality. So now the Rebbe is going to talk a little bit longer about this idea. I talked about all the ideas. The Rebbe just sort of listed them. But now we're going to talk a little longer about this idea, which again, for people that have been with us in this class for a while, this will be very reminiscent of themes we discussed in chapters 21 and 22 and 23 and 20. 20, 21, 22, not 23, my mistake. 20, 21, and 22. Just as before creation, what was there? God. All there was, so to speak, was God. There was God, and He took up all the space. There was actually no roof for creation because He took up everything. There was no vision of creation. You couldn't say, if you were there, could you imagine there would be creation, because there was nothing there. But if you were there, you wouldn't have been able to envision it because there's no space. It's all Him. And also now, at this moment, when there's space, when there's creation, when there's even physical space, which totally makes no sense. Like if this, or we could say if you could envision, because before there was physicality, there were angels. So if you could just, again, with your fantastic imagination, imagine the angels like yapping together and, you know, in their communal gathering, their version of the mikvah, and they're yapping together and they're saying, you know, I heard rumors, God's going to do something and make something, and it's going to be something that's, I don't know what they would have called it, but it would be like, no way, impossible. I remember, this is a very, very poor metaphor for it. But I remember I was in Israel in seminary. This was in the 80s. And a friend of mine told me that if we were in a seminary in, you know, Israel, in the second extension of the Chabad settlement in central Israel called Kfar Chabad. So we were in the second like extension of that settlement. And she said, if you go to the first one and you go to the central office, they have this really like cool, amazing thing that you like write a letter to the Rebbe and they put it in a machine and like poof, the letter comes out in New York. I said to her, you're crazy. Like, you know, you're crazy. Whatever, pieces of paper don't go from Israel to New York. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I know it's a letter to the Rebbe, but it still doesn't make any sense. Well, I never heard of a fax machine. Neither did she, actually. So to her, it was like a little bit of a magical concept. But it actually was real, but not something we could fathom. Imagine before physicality, fathoming physicality. Impossible. But true, God did it. He took self and he managed to like squish and squeeze self and lessen self so creation could emerge. Creation means an entirely spiritual existence. And then that got like more squished and more squeezed and more constricted and more inward turned. And then things of creation, godly things, godly realities could emerge. That's like, oh my God, how could this be? This is God. How did God become this? How did godliness become this? And then like the biggest feat, so to speak, we could not imagine is physicality comes. God, what's the matter of this world? Godliness. That's all there is. There is no other thing. It's all God. It's all him. And he made self physical. And the ultimate, unbelievable innovation no one could have ever envisioned is he took self and made evil. That's the ultimate testimony to how far God could go in creation, in transforming self. But it's all self. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe is saying, just as before creation, prior to 5,700, almost 83 years ago, all there was God. So too now at this moment, when we have myriads of spiritual realities, myriads of hosts, of angels, of worlds, of heaven, Gan Edens, and physical, and a whole Milky Way galaxy and solar system and planets. All there is God. He changed not one iota. It all was him. It all is him. It all will be him. That's all there is. And that's the concept of this highest level our mind's going to try to stretch to envision God's unity. Any questions on this? So also now, once we have all the spiritual hosts, all the myriads of spiritual galaxies, and we even have all the physicality, it's exactly the same. He is alone. It's only him. And guess what? Not only is it all him, nothing changed. There's no change to him by all of these, what we would call changes. So now, and again, as I said, we're going into some deeper thoughts here. The Rebbe put out information. And the information the Rebbe put out, the Rebbe said, no change. And you're like, okay, sure, that makes perfect sense. No, actually, it doesn't make sense to you at all if you think about it. Of course, it doesn't make sense. What do you mean God didn't change? First, there's no possibility of creation. The thought that there could be a creation is impossible because he is all and takes up the space so intently that there's no room to envision and something else. And now, 5,700, almost 83 years later, there's a lot of else. And it's all only him. And he didn't even change at all. No change. So how do we process that? So the Rebbe now is going to give us two different ways to wrap our mind around something completely counter-instinctive. Completely not how our minds would understand, but he's going to give us some tools that our minds can understand this. Some scaffolding, some ideas of like, oh, yeah, I understand that. Okay. I'm going to make a big leap and apply it here as well. So we have two thoughts, and we are not going to get through both tonight, but we will do the first one. Now, as I said to you, this chapter is a big leap of depth over what we've been doing until now. And again, the Alter Rebbe, as this master teacher, has been taking us step by step by step by step. So now we're ready for like some of the bigger times, some of the bigger concepts. So the Rebbe says, now again, remember that also this is all only being expressed to change my personal work. The Alter Rebbe's goal is not for me to be a theologian, not for me to be a philosopher. The Alter Rebbe's goal in this chapter is for me to live with joy. All of this, as we will not understand today, but will understand next week, is to bring me to a joy deeper than the joys I achieved in chapter 31. And I achieved real joy. I achieved 4 levels of joy. I even got some cool existential answers in chapter 31. But now I'm going to a whole new level of depth to create a much deeper joy in God's reality. So the first way of understanding this thing that doesn't really make sense to my brain, and again, what I'm trying to understand is, how did God not change by this? Sounds like a very big change. Mipnei, because Shekol HaNifraim, all of creation, again, creation doesn't just mean me, it doesn't just mean my pen, it doesn't just mean physicality. It means everything that happened from that first primordial shift. All of the spiritual realities that we don't talk about in Tanya, and all of the spiritual realities that we do talk about in Tanya, and everything we know in physicality, that's everything we're talking about there. All of creation, B'telin etzlo b'metzias mamish, are absolutely nullified, no existence in contrast to his existence. What does that mean? So the Rebbe now creates a parable, a metaphor for us to understand. And he's going to give us 2. Kibitul oisius hadibur b'machshava b'mekayram b'sharsham, like the nullification of the letters of speech and thought in their source, humahus hanefesh b'atzmusa, the essence, the being of the soul. We don't even really mean the essence of being in the soul. Meaning the powers of soul, as we have the 10 soul powers we're enumerating here. At this point, they're unlettered. They don't exist as thought. They don't exist as words. Before they come down and emerge to the garment, the vehicle of thought, and ultimately of speech. As we discussed at length in chapter 20 and 21. All right. If you remember chapter 20 and 21, that made sense. If you don't, you didn't understand the thing I just said. Probably. Maybe you did. You're amazing. But if you didn't, you're normal. So what are we talking about here? So the Rebbe, again, has a very big challenge. He wants me, he wants you to understand something that's very hard for a human brain to comprehend. Why is it so hard for us to understand God? Very simply, because we're in a box. And everything we compute is within that box. That's the framework of all existence. So we're in a box called time, we're in a box called space, and we like know God is bigger than time, and we know God is bigger than space, but it doesn't really have much meaning to us. We just know it. So now we want this quantum leap of understanding how creation didn't change God at all. And the Rebbe said, okay, I said that statement, and I know it's puzzling you, so I gave you an answer. Why did creation not change God at all? Because it's all completely nullified to his existence. And now we're like, great, what are you talking about? So now the Rebbe is fleshing out that answer in two ways. The first way that I just read is a little more harder for us to understand. It's less physical, but it has a certain advantage. And the second way, to be continued next week, is more physical and has a different advantage. One that it's easier for us to understand because it's more physical. So we're going to start here with this more spiritual example, this more spiritual metaphor for the concept. We speak. Speech is a product of thought. So I'm speaking obviously in a language. We're speaking now in English. My lettered speech is actually a product of my lettered thought. I think consciously in a language. The richer your vocabulary, the more elaborate your thoughts can be. You got more ways to think about something because I have more language. So I speak in language and I think in language. Deeper than my thoughts that are articulated in words, in language, is the thought that's wordless. As the Alter Rebbe was saying, unlettered thought. We might call it our subconscious thought, our wordless thought. Deeper than that is the powers of soul from which that thought emerged. Deeper than that is the soul itself. So envision a word. What's that word in contrast to the source of words? Nothing. We talk all day long. What's the power of speech, of any words, in contrast to the power of thought from which those words emerged? Nothing. Speech is such a lower reality than the thoughts that produce them. You ever had you were exhausted and you fell asleep for like 12 minutes. And you had such a dream in those 12 minutes, and you know the dream can only take 12 minutes because that's the time you were sleeping. But you woke up and you could remember your dream, and there's no way you could have dreamt all that. Like, you can't say it that fast, but you could dream it that fast because it's not speech, it's thought. So what's a word compared to the power of speech? What's that word compared to the power of thought from which the speech emerged? Even more nothing, because speech is so remote and so detached from thought. What's that word in contrast to the source of that lettered conscious thought, which is unlettered subconscious thought? Even more nothing, because in subconscious thought, you don't even have words from which you can even see how that word emerged. You just have awareness that then becomes a conscious thought, that then becomes a power of speech, that then becomes that word. Well, what's that word in contrast to the powers of soul from which comes the subconscious, from which comes the conscious, from which comes the power of speech, from which comes that word? I mean, for sure nothing. Now I'm jumping. There's no letters, there's no words, there's not even human dimensions. It's all godly dimensions. And what's that word then in contrast to the soul herself, not even her powers? It doesn't even exist. So you see how something that does exist, as you go back and back in the roots from which it comes, from its origin point, deeper and deeper, it more and more doesn't exist at all. And that is what we're saying is all creation, just like that word. In contrast, again, we just compared a word to the power of speech, to the power of conscious thought, to the power of unlettered subconscious thought, to the power of the aspects of the soul, to the power of the soul. We just went like 5 levels. What's creation in contrast to God? How many levels and levels and levels and levels? Again, what's the word in contrast to? What's the word in contrast to? What's creation? Does it have any existence when I get all the way back to God? Now, why am I saying this metaphor of anything to bring out this point? I mean, it actually works quite well if you think about it. But there's a very pointed reason the Rebbe is saying this. Because all of creation is words. God speaks and it is. The entire world, again, we don't just mean the physical, we don't just mean the pen. I do have other physical things here to use, a kicking word, my pen, the cup. We don't just mean physical. We mean all of creation, all the levels and levels and levels of godly energy beyond anything we understand. They're all words. God's words. God speaks and it is. In the first chapter of Genesis, first chapter of Rejoice, there are 9 times where it says, and God said, let there be. And the first and primordial of all is the very first sentence of the entire Torah, the entire Bible. That becomes 10. Those 9 plus that first opening sentence is 10. And those are the 10 utterances that God says again and again and again and again and again from the beginning of time. Perpetually, God keeps speaking the words of creation into existence. And everything that is, that we understand and we don't understand, is all God's words. And now we can take this metaphor that the Alter Rebbe said, what's a word? AKA all of creation, because that's what creation is, God's words, in contrast to the source of the speech, even deeper in contrast to the source of the thoughts, even deeper in contrast to the source of the unlettered thoughts, even deeper in contrast to the aspects of the soul from which those unconscious and then conscious and then words come, and even deeper in contrast to the soul itself. What's that word in contrast to God? What's creation in contrast to God? Oh, nothing. That's why God didn't change. Okay. Any questions, any thoughts on any of this? All right. So we said a lot. There's a lot to absorb. And this is going to bring us to joy. Give me next week. This is all to feel true, real, inner joy that lasts no matter what's going on. Who has something to share, something they would like to thank God for, some miracle they experienced this week, or just something nice that they'd like to thank God for?
I'll say something. It was really nice on Shabbos. I live on the 2900 block of Estes. One of the neighbors, a few doors down, decided that she would make like a get together, shalashudas, and people, cook things and send things and whatever. I wasn't gonna cook whatever, so I had 2 bags of Trader Joe popcorn, so I sent that. But I'm just saying, it was so lovely. People, women, from all different groups, and Yushin and that, and just all different people came together and enjoyed each other's company so much. It was, I said to a few people, this is such a Mashiachic thing, because it's just bringing people together, and it's beautiful. And she gave
Sounds very Mashiach and very beautiful, very, very
woman
love and unity of Jews.
The woman who did it gave a little Devar Torah about Elul, and it was lovely, So
sounds amazing. We should all be inspired if we have other people on your block that you can make a block party with. That's a great idea.
We call it Estes is the bestest. And people do things for Chai Lifeline, so you send $5, whatever you want, just to participate. It's really beautiful.
That's so nice. It's so nice. And it's so nice to be inspired by Elul and to make it very practical. And someone just texted me or WhatsApp, sent me a chat, sorry for my lack of language here, sent me a direct message, very similar, that she also just experienced. And that's so nice. It's so nice that people are translating things into reality. You know, not just beautiful ideas, but like make a block party. Everyone's invited. Everyone bring food. And that's beautiful. I'm saying very seriously, other people, Sarah's not going to charge. No copyrights here. If you piggyback on.
It wasn't my idea. It was the person, because she moved in right before COVID and she didn't get to really meet that many people.
Amazing. That is amazing. It's so beautiful. It's exactly what we mean by Mashiach, living with redemption. So, anyone else? Anyone else have something they would like to share or thank God for? Okay. Let us do the thought of this week. This week in 1991, Kiseitse. So the Rebbe speaks in this week's talk in 1991 of the juxtaposition of the Torah portion by Shacharis in the morning, Kiseitse, when you go out to war, with the one we read in the afternoon, Kisavo, when you come into peace, you're settled in your land, everything is wonderful and peaceful. And basically in one thought, what the Rebbe pulls from that is that peace and that ease should modify the war with the exile that we're going through. We're in a battleground. We have to bring redemption. Battles are tough. This is a battle with ease. It's a battle knowing you already won. It's a battle and you've arrived. So a lot of times we look at life and say, yeah, life is hard. Yeah, this is tough. And they're saying, no, you're conquering, but with ease, with bounty, with all the already got there, already arrived. You've made it as you're in the trenches. That's how we should be doing the work, with a state of mind like we already won. It's all good. Life is so good and easy. So the Rebbe says this especially relates all these ideas to the fact that we're in the month of Elul, as Sarah just mentioned, and at a time so close to the redemption, and a time where we're really talking about the marriage. Redemption is a time of the ultimate consummation of the marriage between the Jewish people and God. So we're really at that time, the Rebbe says, we're so close. Like you could already hear the wedding music. We're so there at that ultimate wedding. So because we're so there, again, even as we're still doing the final mop-up job, final bringing in the good stuff job, already hear the wedding music playing, already know we're here, we've arrived, and therefore we can do a completely different energy level. I heard someone yesterday saying a story, a true story, of a man that was in a very, an Israeli, and he always had this vision, this desire to be in this like very, very crack unit in the Israeli army, a paratrooper unit, very exclusive unit. It was always his fantasy, always his dream. He was always like bodybuilding and getting himself ready. And now he, came to the Miluim, he came to this initiation, and this was the unit he wanted, and he passed the preliminaries. And now he's like going through all the arduous things to prove himself that he could really be in this unit. And it's horrific. And he worked, and for years, and he dreamt and desired, and he totally wanted to be in this unit. And he keeps pushing his body and pushing his body and pushing his body. And his body finally collapsed. He collapsed. That was it. His body said, sorry, I'm done. Could not move. And if he stopped moving, that's it. He lost his dream, but his body wouldn't obey. And as they called in the paramedics to help him, and put him on the side, put him on a stretcher, give him the support he needed, and he obviously was not going to make it. But what did he do? His body was done. The paramedic said to him something like, Oh, like, so I was like, oh, it's so sad. There's only 1.5 kilometers left. Not saying it to get him to move, just like saying the fact. So sad, your body collapsed when there's 1.5 kilometers left. He heard that. He jumped up and he made it the rest of the way. There's 1.5 kilometers left after everything I've been through. His body that collapsed managed to do that last 1.5 kilometers because he was so close. So when we really get it, the Rebbe is saying, Mashiach is so here, we can do the work with ease, with joy, with confidence, with positivity, not with this enormous burden that we're carrying, but with this energy of like, we've arrived. We should have a wonderful week, a very Mashiach week. We should see it. All the deep thoughts we were thinking should really translate into feeling perfumed by God's energy, and everything we deal with, we should still sense that perfume. Thank you so much for joining.
So much for the beautiful shir.